who's actually going to get the most out of this HP ProDesk SFF 400G9, who can safely walk away, and does the price make sense for a regular office worker? Those are the three things I'm trying to answer today, because buying a small form factor desktop isn't just about fitting it under a monitor, it's about whether the trade-offs line up with your daily workflow. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I've spent a good chunk of the past week looking at the specs, digging through a handful of buyer comments on similar HP business boxes, and even setting up a test rig to see how it behaves when you throw a typical office load at it. Let's start with the bigger picture. Mini PCs and small form factor, SFF, desktops have been carving out a niche for the last decade because they promise a full-size Windows experience without hogging desk real estate. The reality, though, is that the space savings often come with a tighter thermal envelope, fewer expansion slots, and sometimes louder fans when the CPU is pushed. If you've ever tried to squeeze a tower into a cramped cubicle, you know the pain of tangled cables and a monitor perched on a wobbling desk. The ProDesk SFF tries to solve that by packing a 14th-gen Intel Core i7-14700, 32GB of DDR5 RAM, a 2TB PCIe SSD plus a 1TB HDD, all into a chassis that's barely larger than a shoebox. So, who should press add to cart? If you're a small business owner or a remote employee who needs a reliable workhorse for everyday productivity, think Microsoft Office, web browsing, video calls, and occasional light Photoshop work, this machine hits the sweet spot. The i7-14700 is a 20-core, 28-thread part, which means you can run several Chrome tabs, a couple of Office apps, and a background backup process without feeling that dreaded lag spike. The 32GB of DDR5 RAM gives you headroom for multitasking. I ran a few parallel PowerShell scripts while streaming a 1080p webinar, and the system never coughed. The dual drive setup is another practical win. The 2TB PCIe SSD loads the OS and your main work files in a blink, while the 1TB HDD can be a cheap archive for older projects or large PDFs you don't need blazing fast access to. Port-wise, the ProDesk is surprisingly generous for its size. You get a mix of USB-A, a USB-C with power delivery, HDMI, and 2 DisplayPorts, which means a dual monitor setup is practically plug-and-play. For someone who runs a spreadsheet on one screen and a Teams call on the other, that connectivity is a real productivity booster. The built-in Wi-Fi and a dedicated Ethernet port cover both wireless and wired network scenarios, which is a relief for offices that still run on a hardwired backbone for security reasons. Now, let's talk about the things that could make you think twice. First, the chassis, while small, leaves limited room for future upgrades beyond RAM and storage. There's no room for a full-size graphics card, and the PCIe slot is already taken by the NVMe SSD. If you ever plan to step up to heavy 3D rendering, machine learning workloads, or serious gaming, you'll quickly hit a wall. The cooling solution is adequate for office-type loads, but under sustained CPU stress, say, a long code compilation or a batch video export, the fan ramps up and becomes audible across the room. It's not a screaming radiator, but in a quiet open-plan office it's something you'll notice. The price point is another factor to weigh. HP positions this as a business-class device, and you're paying for the i7 and the DDR5 memory bundle. For a company that needs to equip 10 or 15 people, the cost adds up, especially when you compare it to a similarly spec'd tower that might still be a few $100s cheaper. If your team's workloads are truly basic email, word processing, occasional spreadsheets, then a lower-end processor could have done the job and saved some cash. On the flip side, if you need that extra horsepower for data analysis in Excel or running multiple virtual machines, the price starts to feel justified. Let's paint a couple of realistic scenarios. Imagine you're a freelance graphic designer who primarily works on 2D assets, logos, brochures, web mockups. You need a solid OS drive for Photoshop and Illustrator, a decent amount of RAM for large PSD files, and a reliable set of ports for a color-accurate monitor and a USB-C drawing tablet. The ProDesk's fast SSD, 32 GB RAM, and USB-C with power delivery make that